When I finally bought my dream cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains after 40 years of working my fingers to the bone, I never imagined my own family would try to steal it from under me. My son-in-law looked me dead in the eyes and said, "My parents need somewhere to live, so they will be moving in with you. If you do not like it, move back to the city." I just smiled. I spent my entire adult life dedicated to shaping young minds. For 42 years, I taught American history at Lincoln High, watching thousands of teenagers grow into adults, while my own retirement dreams seemed forever on the horizon. Every morning, I would stand before my classroom with coffee in hand, sharing stories about the founding fathers and civil rights leaders, secretly counting down the days until I could escape to the mountains. The dream began when I was just 30, during a weekend camping trip with my late wife Laura. We had pitched our tent near a crystal-clear stream, surrounded by towering pines that whispered in the mountain breeze. As we sat beside the campfire that evening, watching sparks dance toward the star-filled sky, Laura squeezed my hand and said, "Someday, Bronson, we should retire to a place like this. Just imagine waking up to this view every morning." That dream sustained me through decades of parent-teacher conferences, standardized testing, and administrative headaches. It kept me going after Laura lost her battle with cancer 8 years ago, leaving me to navigate life alone with our daughter Jessica as my only family. The cabin represented not just a retirement plan, but a promise I had made to Laura and to myself. When the time finally came, I spent months researching the perfect location. It had to be remote enough for peace and quiet, but not so isolated that I would become completely cut off from society. I wanted mountain views, access to hiking trails, and a small town within reasonable driving distance. After countless property listings and 6 in-person viewings, I found it. A 3-bedroom log cabin on 5 acres of wooded land, perched on a ridge overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains. The cabin needed work, certainly. The previous owner had let maintenance slide in his final years, leaving the deck in need of repair and the kitchen stuck firmly in the 1980s. But the bones were good, the location was perfect, and most importantly, it felt right. The moment I stepped through the front door and saw sunlight streaming through the wall of windows facing the mountain view, I knew Laura would have loved it. Jessica seemed genuinely happy for me when I called to tell her about my purchase. She had always been supportive of my retirement dreams, even encouraging me to retire earlier than I had planned. "Dad, you gave everything to those students for decades," she had told me. "It's time to live for yourself now." At 41, Jessica had built a successful career as a pharmaceutical sales representative. She had married Doug Taylor 6 years ago, a corporate attorney whose ambitious nature had initially impressed me. He came from a wealthy family in Connecticut and had the polished manner of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. While we were never particularly close, Doug had always been respectful, if somewhat distant. "We should come see this mountain paradise of yours," Jessica said over the phone after I closed on the property. "Doug has some vacation days coming up next month. Would that work?" I was thrilled at the prospect of showing them my new home, and eagerly agreed. The weeks before their visit were a flurry of activity as I settled in, unpacked my belongings, and began planning the renovations that would transform the cabin into my perfect retirement haven. By the time Jessica and Doug arrived, I had replaced the water heater, repaired the worst parts of the deck, and started clearing an overgrown hiking trail that wound through my property. I was exhausted but happier than I had been in years, eager to show my daughter and son-in-law the progress I had made. Their sleek black SUV pulled into my gravel driveway on a Friday afternoon. Jessica stepped out first, her face lighting up as she took in the surroundings. "Oh, Dad, it's beautiful," she exclaimed, hurrying over to embrace me. Doug emerged more slowly, his eyes scanning the property with an expression I couldn't quite read. He shook my hand firmly and offered a tight smile. "Quite the rustic retreat you've got here, Bronson," he commented, emphasizing the word rustic in a way that made it sound less than complimentary. I chose to ignore the tone and led them inside, proudly pointing out the cathedral ceiling in the great room, the stone fireplace, and the wall of windows showcasing the breathtaking mountain view. "Those mountains look even better with a drink in hand," I said, pouring 3 glasses of whiskey. "To new beginnings." We clinked glasses, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. Jessica asked thoughtful questions about my renovation plans while Doug wandered around, opening closets and peering into the spare bedrooms. I noticed him taking photos with his phone but thought nothing of it at the time. That evening, I prepared a special dinner to celebrate both my retirement and their visit. I had spent the afternoon marinating steaks from the local butcher and preparing baked potatoes and a fresh salad. As we sat around the dining table, enjoying the meal and the sunset view, Doug cleared his throat. "You know, Bronson, this place is really something," he began, swirling the wine in his glass. 3 bedrooms for just one person seems like a lot of space, especially that suite on the other side of the house, with its own bathroom. "I use one bedroom as my office," I explained, "and the third is for guests. For when Jessica visits, or my brother comes down from Pennsylvania." Doug nodded thoughtfully. "Speaking of family needing places to stay," he said, his voice casual but his eyes sharp, "my parents are going through a rough patch right now. The economy hit their investments pretty hard." "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied, genuinely concerned. I had met Doug's parents, Harold and Patricia, only a few times, but they had seemed like decent people. "Yeah, they might need some family support soon," Doug continued, his gaze lingering on the framed photos of my new cabin that I had hung on the wall. "They've always loved the mountains." Something in his tone made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I glanced at Jessica, who was suddenly very interested in cutting her steak into increasingly smaller pieces. "Well," I said carefully, "I hope things turn around for them." The conversation shifted to other topics, but a subtle tension had entered the room. As I cleared the plates later that evening, I overheard Doug on the phone in the guest bedroom, his voice low but excited. "It's even better than I thought," he was saying. "Tons of space, completely isolated. He'll barely notice we're here." That was the moment I realized the dream I had worked toward for 40 years might be in jeopardy. Life in the mountains settled into a pleasant rhythm after Jessica and Doug returned to the city. Spring was giving way to summer, bringing longer days perfect for tackling my renovation projects. I replaced the dated kitchen countertops with locally quarried granite, installed new energy-efficient windows throughout the cabin, and built raised garden beds where I planted tomatoes, peppers, and herbs. Each improvement made the place feel more like home, more like the vision Laura and I had shared all those years ago. I made friends in the small town 15 miles down the mountain. There was Frank at the hardware store, who always had practical advice for my endless projects, Beth, who ran the local diner and saved me the last piece of apple pie on Thursdays, and my nearest neighbor Tom, a retired forest ranger, who lived 2 miles down the road. It wasn't a large social circle, but it was exactly what I needed after decades of being surrounded by hundreds of teenagers every day. The peace I had found was disrupted on a warm Saturday in July when a familiar black SUV came rumbling up my driveway, kicking up dust in its wake. I was on the deck, sanding down railings in preparation for staining, when Jessica and Doug emerged from the vehicle. Their arrival was unexpected, no phone call or text to warn me they were coming. "Surprise!" Jessica called out, waving as she approached. Her smile seemed strained around the edges. Doug followed behind, carrying what appeared to be architectural magazines and a leather portfolio. My stomach tightened at the sight. "What brings you two up to the mountains?" I asked, setting down my sanding block and wiping my hands on my jeans. "We thought we'd come check on how the renovations are progressing," Doug replied, his eyes already surveying the changes I'd made to the deck. "Plus, we have some ideas we wanted to discuss with you." Inside, Jessica busied herself making iced tea, while Doug spread several magazines across my coffee table, opening them to pages showing renovated mountain homes with multi-generational living spaces. My unease grew as he began describing the potential he saw in my cabin. "The layout is actually perfect," he explained, pulling out a roughly sketched floor plan from his portfolio. "If we expanded the guest wing with an additional bathroom and sitting area, it could become a completely private suite." "For visitors?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Well, that's what we wanted to talk to you about," Jessica interjected, setting down glasses of tea and perching nervously on the arm of the sofa. "Doug's parents are really struggling, Dad. The retirement community where they were living has raised rates beyond what they can afford, and they need to be out by the end of August. We've been looking at options," Doug continued smoothly, "but with the housing market being what it is, and their financial situation," he let the implication hang in the air. I took a long drink of tea, buying time to collect my thoughts. "That's a difficult situation, but I'm not sure how I factor into their housing crisis. Doug leaned forward, his expression earnest in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes. They need a place to stay, just temporarily while they figure things out. The extra bedrooms here are sitting empty, and you've got all this space to yourself. It wouldn't be for long, Jessica added quickly. Just until they get back on their feet. I set my glass down carefully. This is my retirement home, not a family compound. I've spent my entire career looking forward to peace and quiet. Doug's pleasant facade slipped for just a moment, a flash of annoyance crossing his features before he regained his composure. Of course, we understand that. But families help each other out in times of need. That's what family does. The conversation continued in this vein for nearly an hour, with Doug becoming increasingly persistent and Jessica growing more uncomfortable. I tried to suggest alternatives, including offering to help them find affordable housing in the area if Harold and Patricia truly wanted to relocate to the mountains. Look, I finally said. I'm sympathetic to their situation, but moving them into my home isn't the solution. This is my space. I need boundaries at this stage in my life. Doug's jaw tightened. You have 3 bedrooms and you live alone. Don't you think that's a bit selfish when family members are in need? Before I could respond, he stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the mountains with his hands clasped behind his back. When he turned around, his expression had hardened into something I hadn't seen before. I've already told them they can stay here, he said, his voice flat. They're giving notice at the retirement community this week. I felt as though someone had punched me in the stomach. You did what? Dad, Jessica began. But Doug cut her off. My parents need somewhere to live, so they will be moving in with you, he stated, his tone leaving no room for discussion. If you don't like it, move back to the city. The room fell silent, except for Jessica's sharp intake of breath. I looked at my daughter, searching for any sign that she was as shocked by her husband's declaration as I was, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. I think you've forgotten whose name is on the deed to this property, I said quietly, fighting to keep my voice steady. Doug smirked. Family property is family property. My parents need help, and we're going to provide it. They'll be moving in at the end of next month. He pulled out his phone and held up the screen, showing me a reservation confirmation. The moving truck is already booked for August 30th. Plenty of time for you to get those spare rooms ready. I looked from the phone to my daughter, who was now studying the floor with intense interest, her shoulders hunched forward. In that moment, I realized how thoroughly Doug had taken control of not just this situation, but possibly my daughter as well. I think it's time for you both to leave, I said, standing up. We can discuss this when everyone has calmed down and can be reasonable. There's nothing to discuss, Doug replied, gathering his materials. It's happening. The sooner you accept that, the easier it will be for everyone. As they drove away, I stood on my deck, watching dust settle on the driveway, feeling as though the dream I had worked toward my entire life was being stolen right out from under me. But beneath the shock and hurt was something else, a slow, burning determination. If Doug thought I would simply roll over and let him take what was mine, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. I just smiled and began to plan. August arrived with oppressive heat that seemed to intensify the tension hanging over my mountain sanctuary. 3 weeks had passed since Doug's ultimatum, and in that time, the situation had only deteriorated. Jessica had become increasingly distant, rarely answering my calls and responding to messages with brief, non-committal texts. When we did speak, she sounded tired and evasive, quickly changing the subject whenever I tried to discuss Doug's parents. It's complicated, Dad, was all she would say. Doug is under a lot of pressure. Can we just not talk about it right now? I had always prided myself on having a close relationship with my daughter, especially after Laura passed away. We had leaned on each other through the grief, forging an unbreakable bond, or so I thought. Now, I couldn't help wondering if Doug had been slowly driving a wedge between us since the beginning of their marriage. My suspicions about Doug's true intentions began to solidify when Tom, my neighbor down the road, stopped by one afternoon with troubling news. Thought you should know, he said, as we sat on my newly stained deck with glasses of lemonade. Some fella in a fancy car was talking to the Anderson brothers about expanding your access road. Said there would be more traffic coming up here soon. The Anderson brothers owned the property adjacent to mine, which included part of the narrow dirt road that led to my cabin. Did this man give a name? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Said he was Doug Taylor, your son-in-law. Tom studied my face carefully. Said he was handling some improvements for you since you're getting on in years and can't manage the property yourself. Mentioned something about his family moving in to help out. A cold weight settled in my stomach. That's not accurate, Tom. Figured as much. You seem plenty capable to me. Tom leaned back in his chair, his weathered face thoughtful. Andersons didn't make any agreements, just so you know. Said they'd need to hear from you directly. After Tom left, I drove into town and made inquiries of my own. What I discovered was alarming. Doug had been systematically spreading word throughout the small community that I was an elderly man struggling to maintain my property, creating the impression that his family was graciously stepping in to help. He had contacted local contractors about renovations to the family cabin, as he referred to it, and had even asked about zoning regulations for additional structures on the property. But nothing prepared me for what I found when I decided to drive past Jessica and Doug's house on my way back from visiting my brother in Pennsylvania. Their garage door was open as I drove by, and inside I spotted several large boxes labeled Mountain House. Something compelled me to park down the street and walk back, timing my arrival just after Jessica left for her afternoon meeting, a regular Tuesday commitment I remembered from our conversations. The side gate to their backyard was unlocked, and I slipped through, guilt battling with determination as I approached Doug's home office window, which faced the garden. The blinds were partially open, allowing me to see inside. Spread across his desk were papers and what appeared to be blueprints. I couldn't make out the details, but the cabin-like structure drawn on them sent a chill down my spine. I was about to turn away when Doug entered the office, talking on his phone. Through the partially open window, his voice carried clearly into the garden. "Everything's on schedule," he was saying. "Bronson's being difficult, but he'll come around once Mom and Dad are actually there." The old man's all talk. A pause. "No. Jessica doesn't know the full plan yet. She still thinks it's temporary." Another pause. "Of course we'll need to renovate immediately. That place is a dump. But once we've established residency for my parents, it's just a matter of time before we can convince Bronson to sign over the property entirely. The land alone is worth a fortune. With that mountain view, my blood ran cold. This wasn't just about finding a place for his parents to stay temporarily. Doug was orchestrating a complete takeover of my property. I was backing away from the window when I knocked over a garden gnome, sending it crashing to the ground. Doug's head snapped up, and I ducked quickly behind a large shrub. I heard the office window slide fully open, followed by footsteps on the garden path. I held my breath as Doug prowled the yard, finally returning inside after several tense minutes. I made my escape, heart pounding, and drove back to my cabin, with Doug's words echoing in my head. The betrayal cut deep, but it was the casual way he had dismissed me, referred to me as the old man, that really stung. At 65, I was hardly decrepit, still capable of splitting firewood and hiking the mountain trails near my home. 2 days later, my suspicions were confirmed beyond any doubt. A large envelope had been mistakenly delivered to my old address in the city, where my former neighbor forwarded it to me. The return address showed an architectural firm in Charlotte. Inside were detailed plans for renovating my cabin, with a cover letter addressed to Mr. Douglas Taylor, thanking him for his business. The plans showed my home completely redesigned. The master bedroom, my bedroom, had been relabeled as a guest suite, while the 2 spare bedrooms and a substantial new addition were designated as the Taylor residence, complete with a separate entrance and expanded kitchen area. A small note in the margin read, "Phase 1 of Mountain Property Development." As I spread the plans across my dining table, another paper slipped out. It was a rough sketch of the property with additional structures drawn in, along with potential lot divisions. Doug wasn't just planning to move his parents in. He was laying the groundwork to develop my retirement sanctuary into some sort of family compound, with me relegated to an increasingly smaller corner of what had once been my dream home. I sat heavily in my chair, the full weight of the betrayal settling over me. The cabin had never been just a house to me. It was the physical manifestation of a promise I had made to Laura, to myself, to honor all those years of hard work and sacrifice. It represented freedom, peace, the reward for a lifetime of service to others, And now Doug was attempting to steal it, through manipulation and deceit, using his own parents as pawns in his scheme. What hurt even more was Jessica's apparent complicity, or at least her unwillingness to stand against her husband's plans. Had our relationship deteriorated so much that she would allow this to happen? Or was she, too, being manipulated by Doug, kept in the dark about his true intentions, as his phone conversation suggested? My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Jessica. "Dad," she said, her voice tight with tension. "Doug wanted me to remind you that his parents will be arriving next weekend. They need to know which bedrooms will be theirs, so they can plan accordingly." I closed my eyes, fighting back the hurt and anger threatening to overwhelm me. "Jessica, we need to talk. Not over the phone. Can you meet me tomorrow? Without Doug?" There was a long pause. "I don't know if that's a good idea right now." "Please," I said. "This is important." Another pause, longer this time. "Okay," she finally replied. "I can come by after work tomorrow, but I can only stay for an hour." After we hung up, I gathered all the evidence I had collected of Doug's deception and tucked it into a folder. Then, I called my old friend Sam, who had practiced law for 30 years before retiring to Florida. "I need some advice," I told him, "and I don't have much time." The next afternoon, Jessica arrived looking tense and drawn, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she hadn't been sleeping well. I had prepared her favorite tea and set out the homemade chocolate chip cookies that had been her comfort food since childhood. Small gestures, but I hoped they would remind her of the bond we shared before Doug entered our lives. "You look tired, sweetheart," I said as she settled into the armchair facing the mountain view. "Just busy with work," she replied, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "What was so urgent that we needed to meet in person?" I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "I'm concerned about the situation with Doug's parents. There seemed to be a lot of plans being made without my input, regarding my home." Jessica shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, I know it's not ideal, but they really don't have anywhere else to go. It's just until they get back on their feet." "Is that what Doug told you?" I asked gently. "That it's temporary?" Her eyes darted away from mine. "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" I reached for the folder I had prepared and pulled out the architectural plans, because these suggest otherwise. Jessica's face paled as she looked through the drawings, her hands beginning to tremble slightly. "I don't understand. Where did you get these?" "They were mistakenly delivered to our old address," I explained. "Jessica, Doug isn't just planning for his parents to stay here temporarily. He's planning a complete takeover of my property." I showed her the property development sketches next, then shared what I had overheard in their garden. With each new revelation, Jessica seemed to shrink further into herself. "I had no idea," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He told me they just needed a place to stay for a few months while they sorted out their finances." "And that's what you told his parents too?" I asked. Jessica looked up, confusion evident in her expression. "What do you mean? Have you discussed this arrangement directly with Harold and Patricia? Do they understand that they're moving into my home, not Doug's family cabin?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. "Well, no. Doug said he would handle all the arrangements. He said it would be easier that way." I nodded, a theory forming in my mind. "Jessica, I don't think his parents know the truth either. I think Doug has been lying to all of us." As we continued to talk, more inconsistencies emerged. Jessica revealed that Doug had been unusually secretive about his communications with his parents lately, taking calls in private and being vague about the details of their financial troubles. She also admitted that their own marriage had been strained for months, with Doug becoming increasingly controlling and short-tempered. "He's been under a lot of pressure at work," she said, though her tone suggested she was trying to convince herself as much as me. "And he's worried about his parents. That's all." "Jessica," I said carefully, "I need to ask you something important. Has Doug been having financial problems himself? Anything he might not have told you about?" She looked away, and I knew I had struck a nerve. "There have been some unusual charges on our credit card, large withdrawals of cash. When I asked about them, he got angry, said it was work-related and I shouldn't question him." The pieces were beginning to fit together. I suspected Doug's interest in my property wasn't just about providing a home for his parents, It was about solving his own financial problems by gaining control of a valuable asset. We talked for nearly 2 hours, far longer than the hour Jessica had initially promised. By the time she left, something had shifted between us. She hadn't committed to standing against Doug, but seeds of doubt had clearly been planted. "I need to think about all this," she said as she hugged me goodbye. "I need to talk to Doug's parents directly." "Be careful," I warned. "If I'm right about Doug, he won't be happy about you going around him." After Jessica left, I continued my preparations. My conversation with Sam had been enlightening, and I had spent the past few days implementing his suggestions. I had the cabin thoroughly documented by a professional appraiser, updated my will with clear provisions regarding the property, and installed security cameras around the perimeter, capturing the driveway and all entry points to the house. I also made several calls to local contractors who had been contacted by Doug, politely informing them that I was the sole owner of the property and had not authorized any renovations. Most were apologetic and assured me they would not proceed without my explicit approval. As the day of Harold and Patricia's planned arrival drew closer, I prepared my home in other ways as well. I thoroughly cleaned the guest bedroom and bathroom, stocking them with fresh towels and toiletries. I wanted to make it clear that while I had not agreed to a permanent living arrangement, I was willing to be a gracious host for a brief visit while we sorted out the truth. I also prepared a detailed dossier of affordable housing options in the area, including several senior living communities that I had personally visited to assess their quality and amenities. If Doug's parents truly needed to relocate, I was prepared to help them find a suitable alternative to my home. The day before they were scheduled to arrive, I received an unexpected call from Harold Taylor himself. "Bronson," he said after introducing himself, "I wanted to touch base before Patricia and I arrive tomorrow. Doug says you've been having some health issues lately, and we want to assure you that we're coming to help, not to be a burden." I frowned, confused by his statement. "Health issues?" "Yes," Harold continued, sounding equally confused by my response. "Doug told us you've been struggling with maintaining the cabin on your own since your recent heart problems. He said you were looking forward to having some help around the place." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. "Harold," I said carefully, "I think we need to have a longer conversation when you arrive. There appears to be some misunderstanding about the situation." "Oh?" His voice reflected growing concern. "Is everything all right?" "Let's just say that Doug may not have been entirely forthcoming with any of us. But don't worry, we'll sort it out." After we hung up, I sat on my deck watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. A sense of calm had settled over me, replacing the hurt and anger that had dominated my thoughts for weeks. I now understood the full scope of Doug's deception, and with that understanding came clarity about how to proceed. Doug had underestimated me, dismissing me as a feeble old man who could be easily manipulated or pushed aside. It was a mistake many had made throughout my life, mistaking my gentle demeanor for weakness. As a teacher, I had learned that the quietest response could often be the most effective, that true authority didn't require shouting or threats. Tomorrow, Doug and his parents would arrive expecting to find a docile, grateful old man willing to surrender his home for the good of the family. Instead, they would find a very different welcome waiting for them. Not confrontation, not anger, but something far more powerful. The truth, presented with calm dignity and irrefutable evidence. I smiled as I watched the last light fade from the sky, feeling more at peace than I had in weeks. Doug thought he was orchestrating a takeover of my dream home, but he had no idea what was coming. Sometimes the best lessons were the ones that caught you completely by surprise, and I had spent 42 years teaching lessons that stuck. Tomorrow would be no exception. The day of reckoning arrived with perfect mountain weather, clear blue skies, and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine. I had been up since dawn, making final preparations for my uninvited guests. Fresh coffee brewed in the kitchen, and I had prepared a simple lunch of sandwiches and potato salad, enough for everyone. Whatever confrontation lay ahead, I would face it with hospitality and dignity. My security system alerted me when vehicles turned onto my private road. First came a large moving truck, lumbering up the narrow drive with more difficulty than Doug had likely anticipated. 20 minutes later, 2 more vehicles appeared. Doug's black SUV followed by a sedan I didn't recognize, presumably carrying his parents. I stepped onto the front porch as they parked, presenting a deliberate image of calm welcome. Doug emerged first, surveying the property with the proprietary air of someone who already considered it his own. His eyes narrowed slightly when he spotted me, clearly not expecting me to appear so composed. Jessica exited the passenger side, her expression a mixture of apprehension and resolution. We had spoken briefly the night before, and while she hadn't revealed her intentions, I sensed she was no longer blindly following her husband's lead. From the sedan emerged Harold and Patricia Taylor, both looking slightly bewildered as they took in their surroundings. Harold was tall and distinguished with silver hair, dressed casually but neatly in khakis and a button-down shirt. Patricia, petite with carefully styled blonde hair, clutched her purse nervously as she glanced between the cabin and the moving truck. "Welcome to my home," I called out, emphasizing the word my just enough to establish the tone. Doug approached first, a forced smile plastered on his face. "Bronson, good to see you up and about. Feeling better today?" His implication was clear, reinforcing the fiction he had created about my supposed health problems. "I feel exactly as I have for the past year," I replied evenly. "Healthy, active, and fully capable of managing my property." A flicker of unease crossed Doug's features before he regained his composure. "Well, that's great. Let me introduce my parents properly. Mom, Dad, this is Bronson, Jessica's father." Harold stepped forward, extending his hand. "Good to see you again, Bronson. Beautiful place you have here." "Thank you, Harold. I've worked my whole life for it." I shook his hand firmly. "Why don't you all come inside? We have some important matters to discuss before any moving begins." Doug quickly interjected. "Actually, the movers are on a tight schedule. I'll need to show them where to start unloading. Mom, Dad, why don't you go with Bronson while I handle this?" "The movers can wait," I said firmly. "Nothing is being unloaded until we've had our conversation." Patricia looked between us, confusion evident on her face. "Doug, what's going on? You said Bronson was expecting us, that everything was arranged." "It is, Mom," Doug insisted, shooting me a warning glare. "Bronson's just a little forgetful these days. Right, Bronson?" I smiled calmly. "My memory is excellent, Doug. In fact, I remember very clearly that I never agreed to your parents moving in permanently, nor did I authorize you to hire contractors to renovate my home." Harold's head snapped toward his son. "What's he talking about, Douglas? You said this was all settled, that Bronson had invited us to live here because he needed help. Let's take this inside," I suggested, noting the movers watching our exchange with interest. "I've prepared some refreshments." Once seated in my living room, the mountain view spread out behind me like a silent ally, I began methodically dismantling Doug's web of lies. I explained that while I sympathized with their housing situation, I had never agreed to a permanent living arrangement. I showed them the architectural plans Doug had commissioned without my knowledge, revealing his intentions to essentially convert my retirement home into a property for his parents, with just a small space left for me. "That's ridiculous," Doug sputtered. "I was just exploring options for making the space work better for everyone." "Is that why the plans label my bedroom as a guest suite?" I asked mildly. "Or why you've been telling people in town that I'm elderly and unable to care for myself or my property?" Patricia gasped, turning to her son with wounded eyes. "Douglas, is that true? Have you been lying to us?" "Of course not," Doug insisted, though his confidence was visibly cracking. "Bronson's twisting everything around. He's been difficult from the start, refusing to help family in need." I turned to Harold and Patricia. "I've never refused to help. In fact, I've prepared information on several excellent senior living communities in the area. I've visited each one personally, and would be happy to help you find a suitable place. I would welcome you as visitors any time, but this is my home, not a family compound." Doug stood abruptly, his face flushing with anger. "This is absurd. The moving truck is here. My parents need a place to stay, and we're wasting time with this nonsense. Mom, Dad, go get settled in the guest wing. I'll handle Bronson." "There's more," I said quietly, maintaining my composure as Doug paced the room. I produced the folder containing evidence of his other deceptions, including notes from my conversations with local contractors and neighbors, all confirming that Doug had been misrepresenting himself as having authority over my property. "And perhaps most concerning," I continued, Is this document that arrived yesterday? I removed a legal-looking paper from the folder. It appears to be a family living agreement that gives Doug control over property decisions and establishes residency rights for his parents. It's been prepared for my signature, though strangely, no one mentioned it to me. Jessica, who had been silent until now, reached for the document with trembling hands. "I've never seen this before," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Doug made a grab for the paper. "That was just a draft. Something my attorney was working on to formalize the arrangement. It's standard procedure. Standard procedure would involve discussing such an agreement with me before having it drawn up," I pointed out. "Just as standard procedure would involve asking me before telling your parents they could move into my home permanently." Harold had grown increasingly pale during the exchange. "Douglas, I want the truth. Now, did Bronson actually invite us to live here?" The room fell silent as Doug looked frantically between his parents and me, searching for an escape from the trap he had laid for himself. When he finally spoke, his voice had taken on a desperate edge. "Look, it doesn't matter how it happened. The point is, you need a place to stay, and Bronson has plenty of room. He's just being selfish, sitting up here alone in this big house, while family members are struggling." "That's not an answer," Patricia said quietly. "Did he invite us or not?" Before Doug could respond, the front door opened, and 2 workmen in coveralls entered, carrying toolboxes. "Mr. Taylor?" one called out, spotting Doug. "We're here to start the renovations you ordered. Where should we begin?" The timing couldn't have been more perfect if I had orchestrated it myself. Doug froze, caught in yet another lie, as Harold turned to him with disbelief etched across his features. "Renovations? What renovations?" "Just some minor updates," Doug stammered, "to make the place more comfortable for everyone." I addressed the workers directly. "I'm Bronson Wilson, the owner of this property. I did not authorize any renovations, and I must ask you to leave." The men looked uncertainly between Doug and me. "We have a signed contract with Mr. Taylor," one explained, pulling out a document from his pocket. "May I see that?" I asked politely. The worker handed it over, and I examined the signature at the bottom. "This isn't my signature. I never signed this contract." Doug lunged for the paper. "That's a misunderstanding. I signed as the family representative. Forging signatures on contracts is fraud, Doug," I said calmly. "A serious offense." The room fell silent as the implications of my statement sank in. Harold stood up slowly. His expression hardened with disappointment and anger. "Douglas, tell these men to leave. Now." "Dad, you don't understand," Doug protested. "I understand perfectly," Harold replied coldly. "You've lied to us. To Bronson. Probably to Jessica, too. You've misrepresented yourself as having authority over someone else's property. You've apparently forged signatures on legal documents. What exactly am I missing?" As Doug struggled to respond, the final piece of my welcome surprise unfolded. The security system chimed, announcing another arrival. Moments later, Jessica opened the door to admit a familiar figure, Patricia's sister, Susan, who I had secretly contacted after learning of her existence from Harold during our phone conversation. "Susan?" Patricia gasped, rising to embrace her sister. "What are you doing here?" "Bronson called me," Susan explained, shooting a disapproving glance at Doug. "He thought you might need family support today. He also mentioned, you've been led to believe you have nowhere to live." She turned to her sister with a gentle smile. "Which is strange, because my guest house has been ready for you and Harold for months, just as we discussed last year." Patricia's confusion was palpable as she turned to her son. "Douglas? What is she talking about? You told us Susan's renovation plans fell through, that she didn't have space for us anymore." Doug's face had drained of all color. As he stood there, trapped in a web of his own making, I realized the moment had come for the final revelation, the one I had been saving, until I was absolutely certain of my suspicions. "There's one more thing we need to discuss," I said, my voice grave. "Jessica, perhaps you should explain what you discovered yesterday." All eyes turned to my daughter, who straightened her shoulders and faced her husband with newfound resolve. "I found your gambling records, Doug, and the second mortgage you took out on our house without telling me. The one that's now in default." And with that, the last piece of the puzzle fell into place, revealing the true motivation behind Doug's desperate attempt to gain control of my property. The atmosphere in the cabin crackled with tension as Jessica's revelation hung in the air. Doug's face cycled through a range of emotions, from shock to anger to something approaching panic, as he realized the full extent of his exposure. "You went through my private files?" he demanded, attempting to shift focus away from his deception. "After what Dad showed me, I needed to know the truth," Jessica replied steadily. "The hidden bank statements, the credit card bills you've been intercepting, the second mortgage I never signed for, I found it all." Harold stepped forward, his expression one of profound disappointment. "Is this true, Douglas? Have you been gambling again?" The word again caught my attention, suggesting this wasn't Doug's first experience with such problems. He didn't answer immediately, instead pacing the room like a caged animal, running his hands through his hair in agitation. "It's not what you think," he finally said, his voice strained. "I made some investments that didn't work out. I was trying to build security for our family." "Blackjack and online poker aren't investments," Jessica countered, pulling several printouts from her purse. "Neither are the sports betting accounts I found. You've lost over $300,000 in the past year alone." The workers who had come to begin renovations shifted uncomfortably near the door. "Should we come back another time?" one ventured. "There won't be another time," I said firmly. "As I stated, I did not authorize any work on my property. The contract you have is invalid." As the workers departed, Patricia turned to Doug with tears in her eyes. "Why would you lie to us? Why drag us into this scheme of yours?" Doug's composure finally cracked completely. "Because I needed the property," he shouted, gesturing wildly at the cabin around us. "Do you have any idea what this place is worth? 5 acres of mountain land with views like this? We could have sold it for enough to solve everything." "Sell my retirement home to pay your gambling debts?" I asked quietly. "That was your plan all along? It would have worked out for everyone," Doug insisted, a desperate edge to his voice. "Mom and Dad would have had a place to stay until the sale went through, and with the proceeds, we could have bought them a nice condo closer to the city. Everyone wins. Except for me," I pointed out. "I lose the home I spent my life working toward." Doug scoffed. "You could have downsized. At your age, you don't need all this space anyway." Harold stepped between us, facing his son with barely contained fury. "That's enough, Douglas. You've disgraced yourself and this family, using your mother and me as pawns in some scheme to steal Bronson's property. I've never been so ashamed." "Dad, please, if you'd just listen," Doug began, but Harold cut him off with a raised hand. "No more lies. No more explanations. The moving truck will take our things to Susan's guest house, where they should have gone in the first place, before you intercepted our communications with her." Patricia, still tearful, added, "We raised you better than this, Douglas. The way you've treated Bronson, your own wife, even us, it's unconscionable." Throughout this exchange, I maintained my position by the window, allowing the family drama to unfold without further intervention from me. Jessica had moved to stand beside me, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder, in a gesture of solidarity that warmed my heart despite the difficult circumstances. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she whispered. "I had no idea how far this had gone." "It's not your fault," I assured her. Doug went to extraordinary lengths to hide his actions from everyone. Jessica seemed genuinely happy for me when I called to tell her about my purchase. She had always been supportive of my retirement dreams, even encouraging me to retire earlier than I had planned. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under," Doug was saying, his voice cracking. "The firm is downsizing, I might lose my position, and the debts just kept piling up." I was desperate. "So, you decided to steal from family?" Harold demanded. "To lie and manipulate everyone around you? That's not desperation, Douglas. That's betrayal of the worst kind." As Doug continued to defend his indefensible actions, a new figure appeared at the door, a man in his mid-50s wearing casual business attire. He knocked politely on the open door frame. "Excuse me," he said. "I'm looking for Bronson Wilson?" I stepped forward. "That's me." The man extended his hand. "Jim Reeves, Mountain County Sheriff's Department. I understand there may be some confusion about property rights and possibly some fraudulent documents." Doug's face went ashen as I invited the sheriff inside. This was the final element of my welcome surprise, though I had hoped it wouldn't be necessary. After discovering the forged contract, I had quietly contacted the local authorities to report the potential fraud, asking them to stop by this afternoon just in case the situation escalated. Sheriff Reeves is an old fishing buddy of Tom's, I explained to the room at large. When I found evidence of documents being signed without my authorization, he offered to help sort things out. Over the next hour, the sheriff took statements from everyone present. Doug attempted to downplay his actions, characterizing everything as a family misunderstanding, but the evidence was too substantial to dismiss. The forged renovation contract alone was enough to warrant serious concern. Mr. Taylor, the sheriff said after reviewing the documents, at minimum, we're looking at forgery and fraud. Depending on what else we find in a full investigation, there could be additional charges. I strongly suggest you cooperate fully and make this right before things get worse. Doug slumped into a chair, the full weight of his actions finally seeming to hit him. I never meant for it to go this far, he murmured. It just spiraled out of control. These situations usually do, Sheriff Reeves replied matter-of-factly. Now, here's what's going to happen today. No one is moving into Mr. Wilson's property without his explicit consent, which he clearly hasn't given. The moving truck needs to be redirected, and any contracts signed by Mr. Taylor regarding this property are null and void. He turned to me. Mr. Wilson, do you want to press formal charges at this time? All eyes turned to me, and I felt the weight of the decision. Doug had tried to steal my home, had lied to everyone, had nearly destroyed multiple relationships in pursuit of his selfish goals. But looking at Jessica's stricken face, at Harold and Patricia's evident shame and embarrassment, I knew that pursuing legal action would only cause additional pain to people who were already victims of Doug's deception. Not at this time, I said finally. But I want official documentation that Douglas Taylor has no authority over this property, and I want restraining orders if necessary to ensure he doesn't return here uninvited. Sheriff Reeves nodded. That can be arranged. And Mr. Taylor, he added, turning to Doug, consider this your one chance. Any further attempts to claim authority over this property, any more forged documents, and Mr. Wilson will have my full support in pursuing all available charges. Understood? Doug nodded mutely, a shadow of the confident, controlling man who had arrived just hours earlier. With the sheriff's help, new arrangements were quickly made. The moving truck was redirected to Susan's address, where Harold and Patricia would stay in the guest house that had been waiting for them all along. Jessica decided she would spend a few days with me at the cabin, while she processed everything that had happened, and considered her next steps regarding her marriage. As Harold and Patricia prepared to leave with Susan, they approached me with genuine remorse. Bronson, Harold said, extending his hand, I cannot begin to apologize adequately for our part in this, unwitting though it was. If we had just communicated directly with you from the beginning, you have nothing to apologize for, I assured him. You were misled, just as Jessica and I were. I hope we can move forward as friends. Despite all this, Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. You've been more than generous, under the circumstances. Most people would have called the police immediately. Well, technically I did, I said with a small smile, nodding toward Sheriff Reeves, who was still having a serious conversation with Doug near the front door. But I've spent too many years teaching young people about second chances to not believe in them myself. Even for Doug, though he has a long road ahead to rebuild trust with anyone in this room. As they departed, followed by a subdued Doug under the watchful eye of Sheriff Reeves, Jessica and I stood on the porch, watching the vehicles pull away. The moving truck lumbered down the drive first, followed by Susan's car with Harold and Patricia, then Doug's SUV, and finally the sheriff's vehicle, a procession marking the end of a scheme that had nearly cost me everything I had worked for. When they had disappeared from view, Jessica turned to me with tears in her eyes. I feel like such a fool. How did I not see what was happening? I put my arm around her shoulders and led her back inside. Don't be too hard on yourself. Doug is your husband. You trusted him, as you should have been able to. Sometimes the people closest to us are the hardest to see clearly. As we settled on the couch, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor, Jessica asked the question that had clearly been troubling her. Did you know? When you prepared all this, did you already suspect the gambling? I shook my head. I knew he wanted the property for more than just providing his parents a place to stay, but I didn't know why until you found those records. I just knew that whatever his plan was, it involved pushing me out of my own home, and I wasn't going to let that happen without a fight. The quiet teacher with the iron will, Jessica said with a small smile. I remember Mom saying that about you. The mention of Laura brought a bittersweet ache to my heart. She always saw through my mild-mannered exterior. Said it was what made me a good teacher, the calm strength that didn't need to shout to be respected. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the events of the day. Finally, Jessica spoke again, her voice stronger. I don't know what happens next with Doug and me, but I do know one thing. I won't let anyone threaten your happiness or your home ever again. You've earned this place, Dad. This peace. And I'm so sorry I almost let it be taken from you. I squeezed her hand, feeling a profound gratitude, despite the difficult circumstances that had brought us to this moment. The cabin is just a structure, Jessica. A beautiful one that I love, certainly, but still just wood and stone. What makes it truly valuable is having people in it who respect and care for each other. Today showed me who those people really are. And that's a gift in its own way. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, I felt a deep sense of resolution. Doug had tried to claim my cabin as his own, had attempted to use his parents as pawns in his scheme, had nearly driven a permanent wedge between Jessica and me. But in the end, his welcome surprise had been the truth, laid bare for all to see. And sometimes, the truth was the most powerful weapon of all against those who would try to take what was not rightfully theirs. The weeks following what Jessica had begun calling the intervention brought significant changes for everyone involved. My peaceful mountain routine gradually returned, though now enriched by more frequent visits from Jessica, who had taken a temporary leave from work to sort through the personal and financial chaos Doug had created. After careful consideration and several counseling sessions, Jessica had filed for separation, a difficult decision, but one she felt necessary given the extent of Doug's deception. The discovery of gambling debts far beyond what she had initially found, along with numerous lies about their financial situation, had shattered whatever trust remained in their marriage. I want to believe he can change, she confided one evening as we sat on my deck watching fireflies dance at the edge of the woods. But recovery from addiction takes real commitment, and right now, I'm not seeing that from him. It's all excuses and promises, without action. Harold and Patricia had settled comfortably into Susan's guest house, which turned out to be a charming cottage with plenty of space for them. Their financial situation, while challenging, was not nearly as dire as Doug had portrayed. With Susan's help, they had begun sorting through their retirement accounts and making sensible adjustments to live within their means. They had visited the cabin twice since the intervention, each time expressing their continued embarrassment over the situation. But with each visit, our relationship strengthened, built on honest communication and mutual respect. Harold, a retired engineer, even helped me finish the deck renovation project I had started in the spring, adding a pergola that would eventually support flowering vines. As for Doug, his path forward was more complicated. The firm where he worked had indeed been planning layoffs, but his position might have been secure had a colleague not discovered his attempts to divert client funds to cover personal expenses. This revelation, coming just days after the confrontation at my cabin, resulted in his immediate termination and referral to the State Bar Association for ethics violations. Facing unemployment, gambling debts, and the potential loss of his law license, Doug had finally agreed to enter a residential treatment program for gambling addiction. Whether this represented a genuine desire for recovery or simply a strategic move to improve his legal position remained to be seen. Through all these developments, my cabin remained my sanctuary, more precious than ever, after nearly losing it. I continued making improvements, adding a small vegetable garden that produced more zucchini than any one person could reasonably consume, and converting the third bedroom into a proper office where I had begun writing my memoirs, focusing on lessons learned from 4 decades of teaching. 6 months after the intervention, on a crisp autumn day with leaves turning brilliant shades of red and gold on the surrounding mountains, I hosted a small gathering to properly celebrate my retirement. Jessica was there, looking more relaxed and centered than I had seen her in years. Tom and his wife came from down the mountain, bringing their famous apple pie. Frank, from the hardware store, attended with his daughter, a former student of mine who had just started her own teaching career. Harold and Patricia joined us as well, having become genuine friends despite our inauspicious beginning. As we enjoyed coffee and dessert on the deck, Harold raised his mug in a toast. To Bronson, who taught us all that standing your ground doesn't have to mean losing your compassion. Your welcome surprise was exactly what this family needed, though none of us knew it at the time. Here's to boundaries with heart, Jessica added, smiling at me with tears in her eyes. Later, as the gathering wound down and guests began to depart, Patricia pulled me aside for a private word. We saw Douglas yesterday, she said quietly. He's completed the 90-day program and is living in a halfway house now. He asked about you. I raised an eyebrow, curious but cautious. Oh? Patricia nodded. He wanted to know if you would be open to receiving a letter from him. Not a visit, just a letter. He says he's working the steps, and making amends is part of that process. I considered this for a moment, gazing out at the mountains that had become my home. A letter would be fine, I decided. Everyone deserves a chance to make amends, even if forgiveness takes more time. After all the guests had departed and I was alone again, I sat on my deck with a cup of tea, reflecting on the journey of the past year. From the joy of finally purchasing my dream retirement home, through the betrayal and hurt of Doug's attempted takeover, to the resolution that had ultimately strengthened bonds with the family members who truly mattered. The cabin stood solid around me, a testament to perseverance and the importance of standing firm for what you value. I had worked my entire adult life for this place, had promised Laura that I would eventually find our mountain sanctuary. That promise, that dream, had been worth fighting for. As the sun set behind the ridgeline, painting the sky in deepening shades of purple and gold, I thought about the lessons this experience had taught me, lessons I wished I could share with my former students. True strength isn't about dominating others or taking what isn't yours. It's about having the courage to protect what matters without surrendering your principles or compassion in the process. It's about recognizing when to stand firm and when to offer grace. Most importantly, it's about building a life that reflects your values, surrounded by people who respect both your boundaries and your heart. Doug had tried to claim my cabin as his, seeing only its monetary value and potential to solve his self-created problems. He had failed to understand that the true worth of a home lies not in its market value but in the peace it brings, the memories it holds, and the welcome it offers to those who enter with honest intentions. As darkness settled over the mountains and stars began to appear in the clear night sky, I felt a profound gratitude for this place, this life I had built. The path hadn't been straight or easy, but standing on my deck, breathing in the cool mountain air, I knew with absolute certainty that every step had been worth taking. The welcome I had prepared for Doug and his parents months ago had indeed broken them, but in breaking, it had created space for truth, for healing, and ultimately, for a more authentic connection among those of us who remained. Sometimes, the most loving thing we can do for others, and for ourselves, is to stand firmly in our truth, even when doing so disrupts the comfortable patterns of deception that others have built around us. That night, I slept soundly in my cabin, secure in the knowledge that I had not only protected my dream, but had also helped create the conditions for everyone involved to build healthier, more honest lives. And really, what better legacy could a lifelong teacher hope to leave? I hope my story resonates with those of you who have faced similar challenges with family members trying to take advantage of your generosity or goodwill. Have you ever had to stand up to a loved one who crossed your boundaries? How did you balance maintaining your boundaries while preserving important relationships? Please share your experiences in the comments below. If you found value in my story today, I'd be grateful if you would like this video, subscribe to the channel for more real-life experiences, and share this with someone who might need encouragement to stand firm in their own truth. Thank you for listening, and remember, protecting your peace isn't selfish. It's essential for a life well lived.